We've covered in previous episodes of the podcast how crimes and investigations can overtake a town or city and change their moral and social fabric for a long time, or seemingly forever. This week we have one of those cases that really has divided a city and divided everyone who has looked into and studied the case, myself included. It seems that if you're familiar with this case and have looked into it beyond the headlines, you're either on one side of the fence or the other. The caveat for this case is that one side finds the deceased's girlfriend guilty of murder, while the other side points at corruption and a believed cover-up by the police force in charge of the case. Hello, my name is Lance, and welcome to episode 161 of Gone But Never Forgotten, The Death of John O'Keefe. As I led off with off the top, this is a case that has led almost everyone that has studied it to believe that either one thing is true or that something that is very nearly the polar opposite is true. As best that I can, I'm going to try to present both sides of the case from the perspective of the accused and from the perspective of the prosecution of the case, and I'll keep my personal opinions out of it until the end of the episode. What I think is lost on this case for many when they start to tear it down and try to decipher what they believe is that at the center of this case, regardless of what actually happened, is the murder of a man who certainly was a good man to many people. We'll get more into John here shortly. What we're going to spend this week talking about took place in the wee hours of January 29th of 2022. When Boston Police Department officer John O'Keefe was found dead in the front yard of another Boston police officer, Brian Albert, in Canton, Massachusetts, after a night on the town with his girlfriend at the time, Karen Reed. John O'Keefe, who was known by the nicknames JJ or Johnny by those that were close to him, was born on December 8th of 1975 in Braintree, Massachusetts, where he was then raised. John would graduate from Braintree High School and would then go on to Northeastern University. John also went on to earn a master's degree in criminal justice from the University of Massachusetts in Lowell, Massachusetts. John would move to Canton in 2014, and he would wind up taking care of his nephew Patrick and his niece Kaylee after his sister and his brother-in-law passed away within a few months of one another. John would of course go on to work for the Boston Police Department, where he was a 16-year veteran. John would also lose his longtime partner on the force, Pat Rogers, to suicide, and he also stepped up to help Pat's girlfriend, who was pregnant at the time of Pat's death, to raise their child as well, taking on the role of godfather in their child's life. John was affectionately called the Godfather by those that knew him for this and many of his actions, and his girlfriend, Karen Reed, even said that he was the patron saint of Canton. On the night of January 28, 2022, John and his girlfriend Karen would head out on the town. A heavy blizzard was expected to hit Boston late in the evening, and they wanted to get some social time in before the storm arrived. The pair went to two bars in Canton, C.F. McCarthy's and Waterfall Bar and Grill. It was at Waterfall that they met up with several acquaintances. Among those was fellow police officer Brian Albert. Just after midnight, Brian would invite many of the people that he knew from the bar to come back to his home on Fairview Road in Canton. It has been said since that Brian did not anticipate that John and Karen would come to the house, but that they would have been more than welcome, and they were there when everyone was invited. John and Karen would drive to Brian's home together in Karen's SUV, and Karen says that she dropped John off right in front of the home, but she had decided not to accompany him because she wasn't feeling well. As was predicted, a blizzard did hit Canton in the early morning hours of January 29th, and Karen said that when she woke up the following morning, she quickly realized that John had not returned home. Karen said that she tried multiple times to text and call John to no avail. When she couldn't reach John, she contacted one of the people that she and John had been with the night before, Jennifer McCabe, who joined Karen with another woman, Carrie Roberts, to aid in looking for John and trying to find out where he was. The three women, of course, returned back to Fairview home to start there, seeing as that was the last place that John was known to have been the night before. As they approached the home that Karen had dropped John off to attend the get-together at, she went into a panic when she saw what she believed was John, lying in the snow outside of the home, unresponsive. Karen jumped out of the vehicle and immediately started to administer CPR on John. Jennifer placed a call to 911 at approximately 6:04 a.m., and Canton Police, Fire, and EMS all responded to the scene. John would be transported to Good Samaritan Hospital in Brockton, where he would ultimately be pronounced dead. A medical examiner would later report that John had abrasions to his right arm, several lacerations to his face, 2 black eyes, and skull fractures, which would have contributed to brain bleeding. The determination was that hypothermia was also a contributing factor in John's death. It truly is whatever happened in between Karen dropping off John at the home on Fairview and Karen finding John's body in the snow the following morning, roughly 6 hours later, that has caused the massive rift that exists between everyone that's involved in this case and the entire town of Canton at large. Not to mention followers of true crime across the globe. This is where the story starts to diverge on either side. Massachusetts State Police Trooper Michael D. Proctor from the Norfolk State Police Detective Unit was the officer that was put in charge of the case and the investigation into the death of John O'Keefe. His reports went directly to a man named Brian Tully, who had ties directly to John's brother Paul. John's brother Paul was captain and quarterback of the Stonehill College football team, and he had been teammates with Brian Tully. This would be one of many of the things that seemed fishy as people dove into the paperwork and the ties between investigators, officers, and those involved in the case. I should mention that John's brother Paul would also take the stand at trial for the prosecution. The investigation showed that pieces of cocktail glass and patches of blood were found alongside John's body, and that pieces of a broken taillight were also found at the scene. The taillight pieces were said to have been a match for Karen's car, which had a broken taillight. Just 3 days later, on February 1st of 2022, Karen Reed was arrested and taken into custody, along with her phone, and she was charged with manslaughter, motor vehicular homicide, and leaving the scene of a collision in the Lower Stoughton District Courts on February 2nd of 2022. The obvious running theory that was being given by investigators was that Karen had hit John with her car when she dropped him off on Fairview, and that he had suffered injuries, including a brain bleed, and he had succumbed to the elements and died from hypothermia. They also obviously contested that Karen had left the scene after she hit John with her car and left him to die there, knowing that she had hit him with the car. Alternatively, in April of 2023, Karen's attorneys presented a different theory that implicated Brian Albert, the officer that owned the home that John had been dropped off at that night on Fairview. It also implicated his sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, who, you might remember, had agreed to help Karen look for John after he did not come home. Evidence showed that not too long after John's death, Brian had sold his home and had also gotten rid of his pet dog. Jennifer McCabe had also made a Google search about how long it would take for someone to die in the cold. That search showed on her phone as happening at 2:27 a.m., which would have been 2.5 hours after John was dropped off on Fairview and 3.5 hours before John's body was found by the women. Heading into the trial, that is roughly where things stood. The prosecution would present that Karen and John had a troubled relationship, and that was presented through John's niece and nephew, as well as many other witnesses to that, who said that the pair did indeed argue and fight a lot, and often spoke about perhaps needing a break from one another to clear their heads and decide whether or not they should remain together. They then alleged that when John got out of Karen's SUV at Albert's home, she had then backed her Lexus SUV into John, causing a skull fracture and a brain bleed. The prosecutor said that Karen knew what she had done, and she left him there to die. The prosecution presented that even though Karen said that she had indeed dropped John off at the home to attend the party, nobody at the party ever recalled seeing John inside of the home. People who were there testified that they had seen an SUV pull up to the house, then leave, and everyone assumed that nobody from the vehicle was joining them and that the SUV had not been there for their get-together. Vehicle data from Karen's SUV did show that at 12:45 a.m., while outside of Albert's home, the Lexus had traveled backwards for 60 feet at a speed of 24 miles per hour, or nearly 40 kilometers per hour. Of course, the taillight on the SUV was broken, and pieces of the taillight were found outside of the home and near John's body. Forensic testing would also show that John's hair was found on the vehicle's bumper, and that his DNA was found on the taillight. Investigators also found the remnants of a cocktail that appeared to have been spilled on the bumper, and John was seen leaving the bar with a cocktail in his hand. Bits of what was described as part of a drinking glass were also found in the SUV's bumper. The defense challenged some of that evidence, and they have said that they believe that Karen was framed for a murder that she did not commit. The defense said that during the after-party, it appeared that John had been ambushed, beaten, attacked by a dog. The Alberts dog was a German Shepherd, mind you, and then left outside in the elements. The defense said, quote, he was supposedly sprawled on that lawn just feet from where those people were walking when they left the residence, unquote. They found it ludicrous to believe that not one person at the party or leaving the party had seen John lying in the snow as they left. They also said that the investigators had failed to carry out a real investigation because they were all close to Albert and his family. They said that rather than looking more into the homeowner and the people at the home, they focused in on Karen, who was an outsider to those at the party, and an outsider to the police force, and those doing the police work. One of the things that Karen's defense focused in on were text messages that lead investigator Michael Proctor had sent to a group chat that he had with friends that he had known since childhood. One friend said, "I'm sure the owner of the house will receive some shit." To which Proctor responded with, "Nope, homeowner is a Boston cop too." He then went on to tell a friend that Karen had waffled John, whose body was banged up when he saw it at the hospital. And a friend asked if John had perhaps been beaten up at the party, and Proctor said, "Nope." Proctor would then go on in that group chat to explain that Karen and John had arrived at the house together, got into an argument, and then that Karen had left. He said, quote, "There'll be some serious charges brought on the girl." And then he said those texts were all right because even though they were sent on the day that John's body was discovered, there was already compelling evidence at that point that Karen had hit John with the car. One of his friends then had the audacity, under the circumstances, to ask Proctor if Karen was at least hot, and Proctor stated, quote, "From all accounts, he didn't do anything wrong. She's a whack job," unquote. He then called Karen, a suspect in the case that he was the lead on, the C word. Proctor then went on to say that she was a babe, but she had a weird accent, and then he made a comment about saying that she did not have a butt. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor asked Proctor why he would text those things, and Proctor said it was unprofessional and regrettable comments that he shouldn't have said any of those things. Proctor then said that the unprofessional comments, though, had zero impact on the facts and the evidence and the integrity of the investigation. There were also numerous private text messages between Proctor and other people in and around the trial, long before anything was going to trial, that showed that he was very unprofessional and very willing to share information with seemingly anyone. So, in the end, this is what it came down to. There was seemingly evidence to show that it was possible that Karen Reed had indeed hit John with her car, but there was also certainly evidence that there was unprofessionalism all around this case, and certainly a shadow of doubt. If you get a chance, or when this episode makes its way onto YouTube, go check out the injuries that John sustained specifically to his arm. I straight up will say that I don't know how the injuries he suffered on his arm line up with being hit with a car at all. I would say that they line up more with being from an attack from a dog, so there you have it. Nothing really seems to make sense to me, and I'm thankful that I didn't have to sit as a jury member on this case, because it honestly seems that the only thing that is for sure is that nothing is for sure. On March 12th of 2024, before the trial started, Karen's attorneys filed a motion to dismiss the case because there were alleged conflicts of interest. They also stated that federal crash reconstruction experts had determined that John's injuries were not consistent with the damage that was seen on Karen's SUV. This motion was denied by the judge, and he stated that it was denied because of extensive evidence that supported the indictments, such as John's DNA being found on the broken taillight. The trial started on April 16th of 2024 with jury selection, and that took 8 days to complete. The prosecution also asked the judge to block Karen's lawyers from arguing that others were to blame for John's death, which is known as third-party culprit defense. The judge ruled that in court the defense could try to prove that using competent and relevant evidence, but did rule that they could not use third-party culprit defense in their opening arguments. The Commonwealth would rest their case on June 21st of 2024 after 8 weeks of testimony that came from a total of 68 witnesses. The defense rested their case 3 days later on June 24th. Closing arguments would come on June 25th, and the jury started deliberations on that day as well. On July 1st of 2024, it was stated that after 25 hours of deliberations, the jury announced that they were unable to come to a unanimous decision, and the judge declared a mistrial. The jury had written to the judge twice to tell him that they could not reach a verdict, and they sent a final note saying that fundamental differences in their beliefs made it impossible for them to find a unanimous verdict. A new trial has subsequently been scheduled for January 27th of 2025, so that is coming up very soon. The prosecutor for the case, interestingly, is a former defense lawyer, Hank Brennan, who once defended the infamous Whitey Bulger in court. Karen's attorney filed motions after that first trial to attempt to have 2 of the charges dismissed. Those charges were second-degree murder and leaving the scene of an accident, because several jurors reached out after the mistrial and indicated that the jury had found Karen not guilty unanimously on both of those charges. On August 23rd of 2024, though, Judge Beverly Cannoni decided that a motion to dismiss those two charges and an appeal has been filed with the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. Also on August 23rd of 2024, John's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Karen and the two bars in Canton that John and Karen had been to. They accused Karen of hitting and killing John, and they alleged that the bars had overserved Karen, who was driving. The fallout, as mentioned off the top, has been immense in Canton. Back in August of 2023, a Massachusetts citizen ballot initiative was proposed to add recall elections to the Massachusetts Constitution. This was in response to the perceived corruption in the case by Norfolk County's District Attorney Michael W. Morrissey. Social tensions in the town are high because everyone seems to be of one belief or the other in this case, with very few people finding a middle ground. In November of 2023, Canton had a special town meeting, and residents voted in favor, 903 to 800, of an independent audit of the Canton Police Department because of the ongoing investigation into this case. Following the mistrial, Trooper Proctor was relieved of his duties and formally transferred out of the Norfolk County DA's office due to sending inappropriate and offensive text messages about Karen to his family and his friends. He was suspended without pay on July 8th of 2024. 2 days after that, on July 10th of 2024, Canton placed Detective Kevin Albert on leave based on testimony from the trial as well. Kevin is Brian's brother, the man that owned the house that John died in front of. There are so many ins and outs with this case, and in my opinion, there is corruption throughout. When you look at the text that the lead investigator sent out and you look at the facts, the fact that they tried to protect their witnesses' phone records, the fact that they seemingly changed stories and intertwined a bunch of people who knew one another, seems like an elaborate cover-up. After all, what harm is it if one woman falls to protect what could potentially be a load of corruption within the police force? We certainly couldn't blow the walls off of that in a time when police are under the microscope, right? Here we have Karen Reed, a woman who they saw as the perfect patsy, and yet, luckily, and thankfully because she's not willing to give up the fight, they're not pushing her over as easily as they wish that they could. There are more and more eyes looking now, and like some of the other cases that I have covered with corruption, namely, in my opinion, the Mackenzie Sharilla case, in a lot of ways and others, I hope and pray that someone uncovers the truth. For me, the fact that Jennifer McCabe had searched to see how long that it would take for someone to die in the cold, long before Karen would have known that something was wrong, is certainly a damning piece of evidence. There's an argument to that a timestamp could be from when the window was opened up on the phone and not when the search happened, but I have my misgivings about that. There is a heavily damning piece of evidence that makes one wonder. The broken tail light is certainly a strange piece of evidence as well, but I have a hard time with believing, with the amount of corruption that has gone on here, that there is not a path where that was part of a setup as well. I don't understand how people can say that they saw the SUV pull up and then spent the rest of the night inside, and also leaving the Albert home without noticing a body lying in the snow. These people, a lot of them, were various levels of police, and for them to walk on by without noticing John in the snow seems to be absurd to me. I just don't know how 6 hours passed without anyone noticing that there was a dying and dead man in the snow. I also don't know how being hit by a car scratches up an arm in the way that John's was. If this was a cover-up, and I do certainly lean that way myself, it seems like parts of it were not done well. For me, the real shame here is twofold. A man who seemingly was beloved by many and who cared very deeply for things like family and friends lost his life and was left to die in a way that was certainly not deserved. The second piece of this is that another life, that of Karen Reed, has been dragged through the mud and put on display, and she will forever be in debt and financially struggling, likely because of this case. And seemingly the only people that think that she committed the act of murder here, in the very least, are the corrupt investigators who were in charge of the case. It seems that even the jury, when given all of the evidence, could not conceive that Karen had knowingly run over John and fled or killed him on purpose. And yet, a retrial is scheduled and on the books in this case, wasting more resources and more time and more of Karen's life on a case that has at least the heftier charges looking like they should be behind a double jeopardy wall, at the very least. Studying true crime can make you a skeptic. This happens to you, and it happens to me and anyone else. But this case just feels icky to me. I understand that the flip side is that spending a lot of money to try and avoid prison is still better than being in prison for life. But the fight that this woman has put up, including a very thoughtful article in Vanity Fair that was written by Julie Miller this year, point me to believe that the very most that could be expected to be found in the way of guilt here is that possibly Karen accidentally hit John with her car and didn't know about it. And frankly, I don't think I even believe that. What say you? What do you think of this case with the main evidence that I've laid out and the personalities of those involved? You have corruption within the investigation regardless of what you believe, but do you believe that at its core that means that this was a setup? Or do you believe that bad people are just being bad people and messing up an investigation with their actions? Do you believe that Karen giving full access to Julie Miller to her side of the case in that Vanity Fair article is just a way of stirring up more support? Or is that a surefire proof to you that she has absolutely nothing to hide? I highly recommend that you do check out that 2-part story if you have the time, by the way. Julie did a wonderful job on the story. Let me know in the comments or on social media what you think of this one. There's a lot of thoughts to be given, I think. I look forward to hearing from other opinions on this case, and I will surely be watching if and when this case goes to retrial. May the truth come out. In the meantime, thank you again, as always, for listening to the podcast. I truly love all of you for your support. This past week, I dropped a midweek patron-exclusive episode at patreon.com/GBNF podcast that covered the dreadful murder of a young girl by her own brother, Paris Bennett. That, along with 9 other cases, are now set up on Patreon for anyone who supports the show on any of the tiers available. Those episodes and so much more are available starting for prices that are akin to a cup of coffee every month. Please consider helping the show in that way. I hope that this episode, as always, finds you well, and I pray that you are healthy, happy, and working hard every day to be better. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you back here again next week when I should have Bailey at my side in the co-host chair again. See you next week.